All right, welcome back to another episode of Out of Bounds on the Boomer Bust channel, a podcast where I give my social commentary on different topics in today's society. I'm your host, Terry, and today going to do something a little bit different. I'm actually going to have a guest joining me and want to have a conversation about identity and racial tension and some of the current events happening right now in America. So let me first start by saying my guest will be anonymous because I want this to be an honest dialogue. So no personal or social media information will be shared. So don't ask for that, please. And it's important for me to remind you, as I always do, that I don't speak for my culture. I don't speak for my entire race, nor does my guest speak for theirs. So please understand this is opinions, and these are perspectives that are unique to us. And I think that's why it's important to hear as many as we can so we can start getting the full picture. So with all that being said, we are going to jump right in. So the first thing I wanted to bring up to you is, of course, the whole George Floyd protest and situation. Could you just tell me a little bit about how you first encountered George Floyd, either the name or the case or the protest, and kind of what were your feelings when you saw it?
I'm going to be completely honest with this. I didn't find out about it until about a day and a half after it happened. We were sitting in supper, and my son brought it up and showed me an article, and I read it, and then he showed me the video of what happened. And I mean, I think I can honestly say that I like a bunch of people, I was floored at the treatment that he received. I've never been big on law enforcement and the way they handle 90% of their arrests. I think they're way too aggressive. I think they're way too abusive. And I'm gonna put this out there because I've not heard a lot about it. I'm more floored that the people standing around recording didn't do anything to help. That really pissed me off too. But after, of course, reading the article and watching the video, and then, of course, we know what happened from that point forward. Protests broke out everywhere, and it was just all of a sudden the pandemic disappeared, and we're talking about this. I was saddened for him. There's been other cases in the past where it doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, what your past is like, you still deserve to be treated as a human, no matter if you're being arrested or whatever it may be. So my heart went out to him and his family, definitely when it happened. I am not, I'm going to go ahead and put this out there too. They just canceled the Cops TV show. I have watched that forever, and I've not watched it because of what happens on there. I've watched it because I sit back and I'm like, how can cops even get away with some of these arrests that they're doing? There definitely needs to be some type of reformation, or not reformation, but change in police, the law enforcement across the country. So needless to say, in my family, in my house, which is a mixed house, I have two children that are half Caribbean descent and half white, and then we had two that are white. Mine and my stepchildren are Caribbean American. So needless to say, it was a hot topic in the house. It still is. We still talk about it. Only because, now I fear for the safety of my children. So needless to say, a lot of mixed reactions, a lot of mixed emotions, none positive. I don't condone anything that the officer did. I think he deserves a lot more harsh punishment than what he's getting right now with second degree charge against him. So that's how I heard about it. And of course, like I said, it's not gone anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere for a long time. So we still talk about it here in the house.
Yeah, I think you brought up some interesting points. And first, let me say, I didn't know about it for a while after I heard the name. And for me personally, unfortunately, it was just kind of, okay, here's another one. And so for me, it wasn't immediate that I needed to deep dive into this situation. I'm like, all right, well, I mean, this is what happens. So that's unfortunate that it happens that way, but that's what it was for me. So a lot of people have kind of had this question about why now, why George Floyd, and why does this case resonate so much? Have you heard that? Have people challenged you with that? And what do you kind of think about that question?
As far as, I've not heard that direct question, why now? Honestly, looking back at previous cases where this type of situation was involved in, white cops, African-American males, all of them are bad. All of them were, terrible tragedies that happened. But this one, I think, honestly, I don't think it's a matter of why now. I just think it was one of those things where, look, let's face it, this country right now, and I'm speaking from my opinion, okay, from everything that I know, what I've researched and everything else, this country is a ticking time bomb. And I think this case, it was just, the bomb went off. People are tired of it. And, you've heard the phrase, enough's enough. And I think that's what happened here. Voices, you look at the previous cases, voices were out there, protests were being done, peaceful protests were being done, political leaders speaking up and everything else, and nothing was done about it. It's like it was just swept under the rug. And now, and sometimes that happens even, in your own personal life, my personal life, or whatever it may be. And there's times where people just get really fed up. And I think this was it. I really do. And I don't think it was a why now thing. I love the people that's out there in the internet talking about it's a conspiracy. Let's get the world off the mind of the pandemic and President, Grump up there and in Washington and everything else, and let's do something else. It was no conspiracy. It was a stupid action by a stupid person harming another human being of a different race. And, George Floyd's race had enough. And you know what? I don't blame them. I don't condone some of the actions afterwards, but I don't blame them. I mean, I think that's just what it was. I don't think it was a why now thing. I just think it was people had finally had enough. And then, of course, the domino effect, everything that happened afterwards. So that's what I feel like anyways.
Yeah, I definitely think that's part of it as well. It is interesting. One of the things I talk about a lot is how I feel like I'm in deja vu sometimes back with the Ferguson stuff. And a lot of the stuff I've seen before, and then people that aren't aware about the movements or they're not tapped in, they're asking these questions like, why now and everything? Why is this different? And I'm like, honestly, it's not different. And that's kind of the point. It hasn't been different. It's been the same stuff. And so that is one of the factors I think about. But going back to something you said earlier that I really resonate with, because even back then, I know there's a race issue in America, having, grow up African-American. But for me, with the case in Ferguson, I said bigger than that, I think it's a police problem. Yeah. I think the idea that we have people among us that can be, held to a higher standard and perform to a higher standard, how sustainable is that on a wide scale? And then obviously we know it's documented what power and authority can do to a person. So it kind of goes to everything you were saying. Like there are cops that stood by and watched it happen. There's people that stood by and watched it happen because they're scared to go up against that authority. And then we also saw what resulted with the riots and protests and how cops treated people. So if you had to diffuse it, even though we know it's connected, but if you had to diffuse the race problem and police problem, do you think those are separate, or do you think that it's impossible to take those two away?
Ooh. I think it's impossible to separate, and let me explain why. My youngest son, he's 21 years old, brand new dad. We were talking about this the other night, and he's like, Jay, he's my stepson, so of course he don't call me dad, but I love him dearly. He said, "How can we even get rid of racism?" And I said, "No." To me, I feel like racism, and I'm going to throw the racism in there because, and what you said about cops with the power trip, when you have that authority and then that abundance of power comes into your mind and it's more of an ego thing. That is part of human nature, and I don't think we're ever going to get rid of it. It's part of human nature. Some people choose to let that take over their mind and their body, and they display those qualities, the racism, the ego trips and everything else, the superiority complex. And then you got some people that color doesn't bother them. Everybody's equal, and I just think that's a part of human nature. It's like emotion. It's like survival of the fittest. It's like eating. It's like drinking. It's like sleeping. It's part of human nature, Terry. That's just my opinion. And I really don't feel like racism is ever going to go anywhere. I think the only way you are going to fix this, and this is my honest to God's truth, my personal opinion, and I don't know how you are about religion, but I'm going to tell you right now, there's 3 ways we can fix it. 1, we all need to turn to God. Now, you may not believe that, but that's just my personal belief. Number 2, we need somebody that's going to run this country, that is going to see the underlying problems that we have and step up and be that leader to help bridge the gap. It's not going to dismiss it, because I'm a firm believer racism is going to be here to the day I die, to the day you die, till our kids are gone, because racism is part of human nature. But it's going to help. And number 2, these law enforcement bosses, the chief, the sheriff, the whatever they're called, I don't even know what they're called, instead of sitting in their office thinking their officers are being trained the right way, they need to step up and revisit everything or every way those cops are trained. And my wife made a good point the other night. I think they need to revamp the psyche valve before you become a cop. I really do. And they can probably do that because they go through them too. But I think there's only 3 reasons, Terry. I don't, and it's bad to say, and it hurts me to say that I don't think racism will ever go anywhere, but I don't think it will. It's been that way since the cavemen existed. And there's evidence of that all the way up through the beginning of time. Racism will always be here. It's going to be up to us as a people, as a human, and we need somebody there that we can trust and depend on to help bridge the gaps, man. That's just my opinion on it. So,
yeah, I think much like money, power brings out what is already there.
Yep.
And so that definitely connects with me. And yeah, I would agree that they both go hand in hand, because especially right now, we talk a lot about white and black as in race with cops and brutality. But it really doesn't matter who you are. If you have some type of prejudice or bias of somebody, and now you have the power and authority over them, you're going to express it, or you have the possibility to express it, I should say.
Right.
So I agree with that. So you mentioned you have a mixed household, and obviously it sounds like you are understanding at least about everything going on. Can you go back into your past and kind of talk a little bit about maybe the first times you remember race coming up, and kind of what were your thoughts back then, and maybe who influenced those thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you a little story. Like I said, I live in North Carolina, that's all I'll say. But the area I live in, everybody knows everybody, but there's still racism here. I was in the first grade, and the guy who wound up becoming my best friend all the way up until last September when he passed away. We got on the bus one morning. I got picked up first. He got picked up second. We were on the same road, and we were both in the first grade. And he was a black kid. I was a little white kid, and we got in a fight on the school bus over a toy. And there were several kids that were older than us that were making it worse than what it was. You know, white people using derogatory names, black people using derogatory names. And it was like, and I remember very vividly, you know, hearing from both sides of the bus, beat that cracker's ass, and you know, then the N-word would come out. And when we got to school, we went straight to the principal's office. And of course, back then when my dad was alive, if you got a whipping in school and they called your dad, you got a whipping when he come and picked you up from school, and then you got a whipping when you came home. But I will never forget him. The principal's name was Roger White. He sat both of us down, and I cannot for the life of me remember the words he said, but all I remember is me and my buddy, we shook hands. And from that day forward, we were inseparable. He rode to school with me every morning. My mom was a teacher's assistant. She started driving me to school. He rode with us every day, all the way up until the day we graduated high school. He rode with me every single day to school, unless he was sick or I was sick. But I grew up in a household that was split. My dad never used the N-word, never used anything. He believed he saw everything as one color. I remember at 2:00 in the morning sometimes, a guy that lived down the road by the name of Charlie Boy would come and ask Dad to take him to Clinton to the Scotchman to get beer at 2:00 in the morning. Now, of course, I wouldn't condone that, because you don't want anybody to add to somebody's alcohol problem, but he would do it. I mean, that was just my dad. And my aunt was the same way. My uncle was the same way. My grandparents were the same way. But I had an uncle that grew up 10 miles down the road from me in a little area. And I remember growing up hearing the N-word almost every time I was around it. And I couldn't stand it. And it was something I would always say to him. And now that I have a mixed family, when I married my wife 6 years ago, we started dating 8 years ago, and her two children are Caribbean and American. You know, my uncle, I could tell he had a problem with it, but never heard anything else from him again. So I didn't grow up clueless to racism. I knew it was there. I mean, it was in schools. It was everywhere. I remember when me and Mitchie, when we were in the 8th grade, the KKK wanted to march down the main road that goes from town to town here. And we went to it just to see what it was all about, and the hatred that walked down that street. So I wasn't clueless to it, but I was fortunate enough and blessed enough to grow up in a family where blacks and whites got along. We loved each other. He was in my wedding 6 years ago. But I always had one or two family members that didn't see the way we saw things. But it's something that, you know, Sean, my son that I keep talking about, he asked me the other night, he said, "What kind of people don't you like?" I said, "I hate ignorant people. I don't care who you are. You can be red, blue, brown, green, Smurf, leprechaun. I have no care. But if you're ignorant, I'm going to call you out on it." You know what I mean? So, but down here in the little town that I live in, like I said, everybody knows everybody. We shake everybody's hands. We hug. It don't matter what color we are. And I think that's why the George Floyd thing and the situation and the ones before that and all these protests have really hit me, not just because of my family now, but because I grew up in a world where it did exist, but I wasn't a part of it. You know, I was a part of a color-free world. I didn't I never thought of using the N word. You know, none of my black friends never thought of calling me cracker or honky or anything like that. You know, so man, I'm getting a little emotional now just thinking about it because my past was great, man. My childhood was great, with the exception of that first fight in first grade, which probably turned out to be a blessing for me and him both because we became brothers that day. And you know, it's a shame he's gone now because I know how he felt about the whole racism thing too. And to see what the protests have done and the way the world is now or this country is now, I could honestly say I think he'd be, you know, he'd be sitting right here saying the same thing right beside me right now. So,
yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry to hear about the loss. But I mean, you definitely. I mean, I think you touched on some things. Definitely, I agree with. One of the things for me that's really big in all this is that. And you kind of, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm super religious, but you mentioned kind of religion. But I always think about one of the things in the Bible that, you know, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities. And so it's a lot of times we see a lot of hate and ugly things, and people are really quick to just, you know, well, you're a bad person. But I think sometimes if we just think about how people got to that point, not that we have to condone it, but we could at least start to understand a little more how people can grow up this way. And I feel the same way because if I didn't grow up the way I grew up, I probably wouldn't, you know, go about things the way I do. My parents, they just didn't really teach me to make decisions based off those things. It wasn't like, you know, you don't see it or it's not there, but they taught me, like you said, we treat everybody, you know, with that equal respect. And so I think that was big for me. But when I think about people, especially people that push back really hard against everything happening, it's just like, I wonder, does anybody grow up in a place where they weren't taught that and they just somehow became that way? And I just highly doubt that.
right. I you know, I mean, I have seen this. I mean, I see it as a teacher. You know, there's kids that are born into that type of family where white is the only color. However, on the other hand, I've also seen kids that are brought up that black is the only color, Hispanic or, you know, is the only color. I've seen that being in the profession I'm in now. So I do not believe for 1 second that people are born racist. I don't. It takes it's seen early. And as soon as it's seen early, and you know how kids are now, man, they pick up early and they run with it. And that's why I say, you know, well, I guess I don't mean to contradict myself. I mean, I don't think they're born racist, even though I know it's part of human nature, but they still have to see that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They have to see, just like a husband and wife fighting all the time in front of their 4-year-old son. Chances are that 4-year-old son's going to grow up to treat a woman, whoever he's with, you know, like a piece of garbage. And chances are he won't either, but there's a good chance because that's what he sees every day. And so that's a way to get rid of it too, but it's an endless cycle, though. You know, it's just an endless cycle because if they're seeing it from their parents saw it from somebody else, and then somebody else and somebody else. So generation thing, I guess you could say. And it's a shame too, because I know some good kids who have, their hearts are in the right place, but their mindset, man, is just, you know, it's bad. It's bad.
Yeah, I definitely, I've seen that as well, and I agree. It happens very early on, and it is interesting what it manifests into. I think about Black Lives Matter, for example, and how people, because, you know, that's back in 2014, and, you know, 6 years later with all the available information you have, there's people still replying, all lives matter. Now, I'll definitely put myself out here, I always do. When I initially heard Black Lives Matter, I felt the same way. I was like, that's weird. I'm like, all lives matter. And it wasn't a political chant at that moment. But, you know, it takes very little effort to find out this information. It is crazy how little effort it is that people don't take. But you just got to be open to it, because then I realized, okay, what that phrase meant and what that movement meant. Do you remember hearing it for the first time, or your reactions to it?
Oh, yeah, I do. And my reaction then is the same way as it is now. It's important. I didn't question it not one bit. I was like, yeah. I said, because they need, and I don't want to say this and it sounds any way other than what's coming out, and sometimes my words get screwed up, but they need a voice. You know what I mean? And the Black Lives Matter movement in 2014 was needed, and it came out. And if you think about it, and I may be wrong here, you may be able to correct me. It came out in 2014. It kind of died down a little bit. And when it died down a little bit, now it's, you know, it's right back up. It should have never died down. It should have never died down. It should have kept going stronger and stronger and stronger. Because the problem is, after the death of Martin Luther King, and then especially after Vietnam, in that general area, the voice of the black man just disappeared. And it took till 2014 for that to come back. And it should have never died down. And now that it's out again, and you're talking about this all lives matter crap, and I'm a white person, and I'm going to say this right now. Somebody saying all lives matter, they're just using that as a freaking scapegoat. They need to shut their mouths, because of course it does. That's common sense. But right now, it's not about all lives. It's about the Black lives, because the Black Lives Matters movement. I mean, and I'll tell this to any student or anybody. I've told it to my family. You know, it's high time. Again, and let me go back. I don't condone the violent protest. I don't. And I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute, so I don't want to jump ahead. I don't condone that. I understand why from a historical standpoint. But the Black Lives Matter movement should have never died down. It should have kept going strong. And it needs to stay strong now and continue forward until it should never die down. I'm not even going to say that next part. It should never die down. It should keep going and keep going and keep going. That's like when Martin Luther King Jr. died and RFK died in Vietnam. Somebody needed to step up. I'm not saying there weren't no voices, but they needed to step up and fill those two shoes. Hell, even feel the woman who started the civil rights thing back in the 30s in Eleanor Roosevelt, and continue on from that, from what MLK's, the great things he did, and RFK and what he tried to do. They should have continued. So when first time I heard Black Lives Matter, I never said, well, that's stupid. I never said that. I'm like, okay, finally, here you go. Let's jump on the train, because it is true. You know, and just like Native Americans, they need a voice. And I'm not trying to steer away from Black Lives Matter. I'm just saying in general, you know, they do. But the Black Lives Matter movement, it's booming now, and it needs to stay booming so their voices can be heard. Because if they go quiet, part of that human nature and that superiority and that inferiority is going to come back into play, and then we're going to have more worse problems down the road. It needs to stay going as strong as it is right now. I'm a big advocate of it. You know, I'm not black. I'm 25% German, 25% Irish, 25% Cherokee, and 25% English. And I'm not saying this because of my two stepchildren or my two children. I don't even call them stepchildren. I'm not saying because of that, because they are a human race. They're a human people. They need that voice, and it needs to continue strong. So I also support it. And my stepdad, who's a Purple Heart Vietnam vet, loving to pieces. He's been my dad for a long time now. He was talking about it the other day, and he said that all lives matter thing. And I looked at him. I said, Pops, I said, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Excuse my language. Don't use that all lives matter crap to me. You want to support the Black Lives Matter movement, then support the Black Lives Matter movement. Don't water it down by bringing up that all lives matter crap. Of course it does. You know, it does. All lives matter. Duh, that's common sense. But the Black Lives Matter movement is what's important right now, because voices need to be heard. And if voices aren't being heard, then nothing's going to happen for these people. They've got to have that voice out there. Don't try to degrade them by saying all lives matter. Shut up. Sorry, I didn't mean to get on.
No, you're fine.
It irritates the crap out of me when I hear that. And I look at social media and Facebook and everything else. And if it weren't for our comic book group me and you were in, I would delete Facebook. I really would, because I'm so sick and tired of hearing all these millennials and these other people, because, you know, talk about, not all millennials, because two of my children are millennials. Well, all my children are millennials, I believe. You know, I just get tired of hearing them use it. It's a scapegoat. Shut up. You have no idea. No idea. So there you go. My apologies. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I think, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think to your point, it definitely at that time back then wasn't politicized. It was a statement, but that's what happens when media, politics get involved. And when things become politicized, we as people kind of get tribal, and you got to be on one side or the other. And so at the time it was just a statement, and then it became an organization, and that's when things changed. But also speaking to right now, I know there's a lot of movement happening, and I appreciate it. But part of it to me is the pandemic as well. And I know a lot of people don't like to acknowledge that, but to me, I'm like, well, it's kind of obvious that's one of the reasons, because people are physically just have the free time to be there and to do those things. So I think that's one of those things. But and the all lives matter at this point, I would agree, is just a front. Like, you know what you're doing when you say all lives matter. It's not even a case of pure ignorance. Is willfully being ignorant, or you're just antagonizing at this point. So I agree with you there. But going back to the protests and just kind of everything, the riots, anything you want to pick up on, what's been your reaction to seeing how much movement we've had throughout the country and some places around the world?
Like I said, I don't condone rioting and looting. I don't, because, you know, that's destruction and everything else. However, and I've said this before, and I'll say it now, and I'll keep saying it. I understand it, and the reason why is because historically, peaceful protests do not gain the attention that is needed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. I mean, you think about the Native Americans in Alcatraz in the 70s. You know, they wanted their land back. They kept telling them, we're going to protest. We're doing our land. Yeah. So what they do, they took over Alcatraz, and they had a shootout, but results came from it. Anytime you have, and I'm hoping that that's what comes out of this, anytime you have a violent protest, more attention is going to be gained from that than the peaceful protest. So I do understand it. The thing that really bothers me about the riots is that the black African-American race was blamed for every bit of it. And you saw probably the same stuff I saw. You know, it wasn't just black people looting and rioting. You know what I mean? It was every race in the United States that were doing it. You know, you had your country people, you had your white people, you had black people, you had Hispanics, you had women, you had men, you had children, you know, teenagers. And for the African-American race to get the blame for all that, it just really disturbed me. Like I said, I guess you could say I'm kind of like Flash in a way versus the Reverse Flash. The Reverse Flash wants to kill people to stop something from happening in the future, and the Flash says there's always an easier, peaceful way, more peaceful way. And that's just the way I am as a person. You know, I'm a veteran, 8-year veteran. I served my time And so there's that side of me that wants to just go ballistic and sometimes and do what needs to be done to garnish attention. But at the same time, for example, if I'm one of them people in the riot and Terry, you had nothing to do with this, and I go and destroy your store, is that fair to you? No, it's not. I mean, that's your work. That's your livelihood. And so the reason that's why I don't condone it, because people took matters into their own hands and destroyed more lives than they did help. For now, unless something changes in Washington or in our own state's governments, But like I said, I don't condone it. However, I understand the need for violent protests. I mean, I do. And rioting and looting. So.
Yeah, I think I fall somewhere in that line as well. Like, it's not going to be me out there doing it, but I understand why people are doing it. And I understand why the frustrations got to that point that you felt that need to express it that way. One of the things that I think is helpful out of all this is that for people who aren't against or who aren't for rioting, or they want a different solution, is force them to research those solutions. Because I see some people that are innately like, no, that's not the way to do it. And then it's like, well, what are you offering as an alternative? And then I think a lot of people have taken themselves up on educating themselves on what are avenues to do that. And so we start talking about funding and supporting Black businesses. We start talking about initiatives to get people to vote. And we start talking about all these different things. And then, of course, one that is popular right now is the defund the police. So as we are clashing on how to get things done, we start to come up with some ideas, some concrete ideas. And so that's the interesting part. What would you say your feelings are when you see the defund the police campaign?
To me, the defund the police means you want to get rid of the police. And I will say this right now, and I think any logical person would understand this. You get rid of the police in the United States of America, you're going to have chaos 24/7. And I don't think that's the right way to go. I do not. I think that the whole law enforcement division, I don't know where you live versus where I live. Here we have, town police, we have county sheriffs, we have state troopers. And of course we have the, SBI, the State Bureau of Investigation, stuff like that. However, I think the only way to really fix that is to revamp that. I said that earlier. I don't think getting rid of it or defunding it to make it where it's less is going to help the situation at all. I think it's going to make this country worse. Now, I don't know if this is true. You can correct me on this, and this is just something I heard through the grapevine, that they want to get rid of the police and start a new type of group for civilians running enforcement, I think. I don't know if that's true or not. Like I said, if it's a lie, you got it as cheap as I did. And I don't think that would help our situation at all either. I just think they need to revamp the whole thing. We have a leader who will not get off his butt or check his ego long enough to realize that the voices are there, the words are being spoken. We need to fix law enforcement across the United States. How are we going to do it? And he's not doing it. He's not doing it at all. He's too worried about presidential harassment on Twitter. And so defunding the police, I'm not for that. I'm not for it at all, because we need authority. We need some type of authority. I just think they need to fix that system that we do have.
Yeah. So one of the episodes I talked about the main three buckets of defund the police. And so there's one bucket that I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I would say this is the smallest one. There are people that want to completely get rid of police, like we don't need people to police. Then there's the group that wants to realign the responsibilities of the police, where we bring in social workers, we bring in victim advocates, we bring in different professionals to respond to certain nonviolent calls or calls that cops aren't trained to deal with typically, and just reserve the cops for, pure violent criminal cases. And then there's a group that wants to just take some of the money from law enforcement and put it back into the community in different places like education or, youth groups and things of that nature. So that's kind of where it is. There's some people that are lobbying for nonviolent police and violent police. So you have cops that don't have guns, basically to do like traffic stops or, highway things or things that aren't quote unquote violent. And so those are some of the ideas being thrown out there. So that's kind of close to what you were talking about. But I agree that you can't just not have police. We need structure. Humans will be as bad as you allow them to be, so I definitely think we have to have structure. And I agree there are some ways we can go about fixing the current system that we do have to probably get it to where we want. But the last thing, I don't want to keep you too long, the last thing I kind of want to talk about, and this is purely from my curiosity and my observation, is there tends to be online especially this idea that you can't really speak up if you're not part of the population that is being, looked at or talked about or oppressed right now. So there are some people that feel that they are too scared to voice what they think about the situations. Have you felt that, even as a person where you have a mixed household, and I'm sure you are able to have those conversations there, but out in public, have you felt that you can't really voice your opinion, even if your opinion aligns with kind of the things that everybody else is talking about?
It's hard to say. I know the only reason I haven't said anything is, like I said at the very beginning, is because of my profession, and we have to watch what we do, because no matter if it's right or wrong or whatever, you're held to a standard. Down here, there have been threats made, so from different individual groups, and I do think that has struck a chord with a lot of people that, if I say anything, I'm going to be racist, or if I say the wrong thing, they're going to try to hurt me or something like that. But then you got your standard hardcore white country boys that they don't care. They just say what they want to say anyway. I don't think it's as big of a problem down here as it may be in other places. Like I said, this area that I live in here, we pretty much, I guarantee you, and this is ballpark, 85% of the people around here know everybody, and we all get along. So, but there are people that you can tell they dance around certain things. When you look at social media, they dance here and they try to put a word here or a word there that doesn't make them sound like they're agreeing or disagreeing. So I can honestly say I wouldn't have that problem if I was allowed to be vocal. I would be vocal. And I don't care. Well, I care, but I would love to say things that I've got to say here today. You know what I mean? And yeah. I wouldn't give it a second thought if I was allowed to. But being in a profession I'm in, we're watched closely. We're under a microscope all the time. So as far as the white people down here, yes, you can tell a lot of them dance around what they want to say, except for that one group. Some people might call them rednecks. Some people might call them country boys. There's hardcore boys is what I call them. They don't care what they say, but I think it's more along the lines of the women, the women group down here that are afraid to say anything. So that's what I've seen anyways.
Yeah. And I don't want to put the pressure on you, of course, by asking this, but, this is from your perspective, of course. So obviously you say if you weren't in that profession, you have no problem being vocal. But if you think about the people that are scared to be vocal online and whatnot, can you kind of explain from your perspective where that comes from? Where does that fear come from that you don't want to say anything right now?
Honestly, I think, when the protests broke out and the rioting and everything, I'll give you an example. About anywhere from between 15, 17 miles down the road from here, west of where I live at, there was a group of African-American males who went on Facebook and said, they came out with this, that at 11 o'clock on a certain date, I can't remember what the date was, they were just going to start shooting white people. And then, of course, that didn't happen. All right. It was a, empty threat. And then it became those people from that group and other individuals getting on there and just blasting white people. And I seen a meme about 2 days ago of an African-American male holding up a poster board. Can't remember the exact words, but it was something like, "Thank you, white people, for joining or protesting with us. However, somebody has to pay for your ancestors' crimes."
Mm.
And I wasn't the only one that saw that meme. It was shared all across Facebook through the 700 plus friends that I have. And I think that's where we are now as a society down here. I think that white people are scared because, remember a while ago when you asked me about the Black Lives Matter movement or the rioting and the protesting, because enough is enough. And I think that's the way white people are looking at it now from an African-American's individual standpoint. They're not going to tolerate it anymore. They're not going to do anything, and they're going to do whatever they do by any means necessary. So people are, for the majority, staying quiet because, and that's another thing, we're blamed all the time for things that happened. I was born in 73. So, and I've done my genealogy all the way back to 1724. So I know about my ancestors. Well, my ancestors never had a slave because most of them were either in Germany or Ireland or England, or they were on a reservation somewhere. But that's the way it is now. White people are listening to the things that are being said, and they're just keeping quiet. They don't want to cause trouble. They're afraid anything that comes out of their mouth is going to be wrong, or no matter what it is, So they're just keeping quiet about it. And I can tell it's hard for some of them because a lot of these that are keeping quiet, I know personally, because I've talked to a kid or something like that, and I've had conversations with them. So I think that's it, majority-wise. This is a new world now, a new country. For the last, I'd say 20, 24 years, being able to say what you want to say is wrong. And that's the way a lot of people live today. So, some people don't care what they say. Like I said, you got that group, they don't care. And then and now with the Black Lives Matter movement, you've got two different tops or two different classes down here inside that Black Lives Matter movement. You got the African-American people who knows the true meaning of that Black Lives Matter movement, and they're doing everything to stay true to that. And then you've got a group inside the Black Lives Matter movement that are, it seems to me, opinion now, seems to me, are trying to instigate violence. And one of the students that I mentored 5 years ago put a post on Facebook the other day talking about, if you white people celebrate July 4th and I see it, I'm going to come over there and kick over your grill and kick your ass. You know, I'm like, okay, that's just anger. And I know this. Okay, I know that's anger coming out in him, but believe it or not, over 40-some people responded to what he posted on there. And some of those, out of those 40-some people, you could see fear in over half of it. So I think that's just the world we're living in now, where they're afraid to say what they want to say because they're afraid of the retaliation they're going to get.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and it could be seen all over. But I'm going to wrap it up there. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to sign off, and then you can stick around. We could talk a little bit after. But once again, just want to appreciate you taking time to have that conversation. And honestly, it's no small thing. Even being anonymous is no small thing. I think a lot of people, as you mentioned, are scared on both sides to have conversations with people that either don't agree with them or don't look like them. And for me personally, I think that's one of the ways we can start working towards something positive. So that's it for the episode. For everybody listening, definitely go to the comment section. Let me know what you thought about the conversation, anything that you want to add in. Please share it around. Continue to get this conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe. And yeah, thank you for going out of bounds.